Serious, what is the most peeped up true story you know? NSFW. Throwaways are encouraged. My brother-in-law is an engineer in the northwest of England. He mentioned about a time working in a molten metals factory where one guy fell into a vat of molten aluminium. It was an unfortunate working accident and they drained the vat and the only thing left was the steel toe caps from his boots. It resonates with me as at some point when the guy fell, he knew what was coming and he had no way to stop it. I worked with a guy that had a similar story. According to him, the dude had basically vaporized by the time he was done sinking into the molten metal. Peep that. A guy I knew from high school was working at a Hollywood video late at night with 2 other girls. Around closing time, a guy and a girl came in, robbed the place and murdered all 3 of them. The guy I knew lived with his grandparents and they would pick him up at the end of his shift. The robbers carjacked them and murdered them too. Undefined. Just think about doing any mundane thing like running errands or picking someone up, and then being shot dead. That's a brutal reality of the type of crime this is. A friend of mine, Ian, was murdered shortly after joining the Marine Corps. He and 2 other Marines, one another good friend of mine at the time, who was best friends with Ian, were out for the night in Memphis when they were approached by a few guys who asked them for weed. When they said they didn't have any, they asked them for money. One of the guys pulled a gun and shot Ian, in front of his best friend. I remember my friend saying, "I want to take the stand. Say that I've never seen that guy before. And watch them release him. Then I want to find his best friend. And kill him." It was one of the most chilling things I have ever heard. Because he meant every single word. This kid was throwing a high school party in a town nearby. Anyways, the kid's dad was also at the party and was drinking with all of the high school kids. Eventually the dad pulls out his revolver and someone suggests they play Russian roulette. A group of the kids, including the dad, agree to play a hand of poker and the winner was supposed to take a spin and shoot at the person to their right. One of the kids won but refused to take the shot. When the kid continued to refuse, the dad picked up the revolver, spun it and shot one of the kids in the head. The party immediately disbanded and the dad ran off into the forest. He was found a few days later by police. Here's the article. Dad jokes are getting out of control. My brother had a friend growing up that he would spend the night over on the weekends. When the family moved off the Air Force Base, the father lost his mind one night and killed his wife, then called his children into the bathroom one by one and hacked them up in the bathtub. Undefined. My mom's older brother used to make her watch as he shot animals to death. He wasn't a hunter and they didn't live on a farm. We're talking neighborhood cats and dogs, psychopath speep. When I was in high school, one of my friends went to party with some upperclassmen. She was 14 at the time. At the party, a group of them roofied her. Then had their dog, some large mix, peep her while she was passed out. She didn't find out until one of her friends showed her the video they took. The video got passed around undefined. If you're a glutton for punishment, here's another story. Reddit. Best friend was raped by his cousin multiple times over the course of 7 years. 7 to 14 years old. Eventually he gained enough courage to tell his family. To my knowledge, nothing came of that. No arrests, and the cousin is still allowed at family parties. Cousin's parents were murdered and she was a baby or toddler at the time. She was alone for 2 days before someone came in the house and discovered the dead bodies and the baby all alone. Guy I used to live with in my halls at uni was too afraid to use the communal toilets on our floor, so would just speep in cups in his room. He would then be too afraid to walk down the hall with his cup of speep, so just let them lay about his room for weeks. My story. Walking down street in Chicago. Man walking toward me. Different man comes out of alley behind him. Slices the man's throat with a razor knife. Guy just walks away and leaves me with bleeding man. Stay with man until ambulance comes. Man lives only because he was wearing a scarf. My friend's dad was changing a light bulb or something that required him to climb up on a chair. Like a wooden dining room chair. Anyway, he ended up slipping and falling off this chair and somehow managed to be anally penetrated by the top of the chair and had to be hospitalized. I work at a school where we reported a family to social welfare and animal welfare. Animal welfare came in. Removed the dogs, declaring the home unfit for habitation. Social welfare came in and then left the children in the home. Horrible situation. I had a deaf guy in one of my classes at college. He was extremely nice and I was in charge of taking notes for him because he couldn't hear obviously. Fast forward to the second week of class and the teacher tells me I don't have to take notes for him anymore because he won't be coming back. I figured he just dropped the class, but the next day I saw in the news he had beaten a hooker to death with a baseball bat in his apartment. One of my friends, before they got off drugs and found absolution and all, picked up a homeless man, took him to a nice restaurant, told him to get whatever he wanted. I remember the friend telling me about how nice the homeless man kept saying he was. Then, my friend, the asshole, says he's going to the bathroom and leaves this poor guy with the bill. He said he just never went back in. Around a century ago in a small village in the mountains of Puerto Rico, a young man brought home his bride-to-be to meet his family. The way the story goes, when the man's father met the bride-to-be, it was love at first sight. The father ended up marrying her. And those two scandalous folks are my great-grandparents. The ex-fiancé is said to have fled the island in a fury, never to be heard from again. My husband's mother was an alcoholic who committed suicide when he was 21. She was divorced from his father, and he and his sister inherited her wealth. But the father convinced the sister to withdraw the entire inheritance from bank account and give it to him. Then a few years later, the father married my husband's best friend. His life was basically a trashy daytime soap opera. Happened many years ago on a school party. Dude got drunk, went to the restrooms and shoved an open 2-liter Coca-Cola bottle up his ass. The bottle sucked vacuum and he could not get it out, so he called an ambulance. They carried him out on a stretcher, lying on his belly, face as red as a Soviet flag. They pulled a blanket over his back, but you could easily tell that a huge bottle was sticking out. He changed schools. I read a story on here once, not sure how true it was, about a guy visiting a female cousin friend and staying with her for a few days. He comes home one night and said cousin's ex surprises him from behind and slits his throat. Guy lays in puddle of his own blood while ex, thinking guy is dead, tries to break into the cousin's house. Guy, obviously not dead, gets up and beats ex senseless. An ex-girlfriend left a bar pretty buzzed one night and pulled out in front of a semi going 60. She survived, but was paralyzed and suffered major brain damage. She died a few years later. The driver of the semi was her father. I recall reading somewhere on Wikipedia a story, consent cannibalism. Some guy whose name I forgot post an ad online asking to eat someone. Some other guy accepted. And he wrote about the result. Undefined. In high school I lived in a really small town in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. One of the kids in my graduating class, I'll call him Eric, lived with his grandmother. Eric lived with his grandmother because his dad died in the Marines with a bunch of other men mid-2005. 3 years later his mom died very suddenly of a ruptured aneurysm. About a month before high school graduation, Eric's grandmother was shot and killed at the convenience store she worked at when she was leaving to pick him up from school. I was molested by my parents' best friend, who was also our neighbor, when I was 12. They never once believed me and to this day think I lied and treat me as if I am a liar. It has driven me to the edge of suicide on many occasions. Even as I type this, there is a lump in my throat and my eyes are tearing up. They are still besties with that peeping monster to this day and invite him over for Christmas and Thanksgiving. It has been really hard. I've peeping hate the holidays. That girl who killed herself a while back. She was apparently being bullied from a site called, no idea what the extension was, but it's something like this, which ended up in a witch hunt that only got one of the bullies. However, after this the police released a statement that said that over 85% of the messages were sent from her own PC. So pretty much she bullied herself to death, which is extremely peeped up. For those wondering, this happened a while back, and the only thing I remember about where I read about this is that it was a UK news outlet. I went to a church in South Houston that was sort of twisted. At one point, our youth minister just disappeared. And we got a new one. I found out later that the youth minister had been imprisoned in California for raping a woman. And then, from prison, he tried to hire out a hit on his wife and kids back home. It kind of turned me off church. You know? When my dad was 8, his mom took him and his sisters to the carnival. While my dad was playing a game, his mom grabbed his sisters and left. She abandoned my 8-year-old dad at the carnival. Friend's dad was caught molesting a toddler. A mob proceeded to use barbed wire to wire him to a tree. After that he was partially castrated, beaten and lit on fire. He lived. Two guys and a girl I went to high school with were wrongfully accused of rape by the same girl. Video evidence contradicting the victim's story was submitted, proving each of the three could not be where the victim said they were. The even more peeped up part is that she accused one of the guys 2 days before graduation and he wasn't allowed to walk. She's now in a mental institute for delusional fantasies and the like. A friend of mine and another guy beat up a guy with hammers after it came out that the guy had touched up my friend's mom when she was asleep. The other guy joined in because the touchy guy owed him money and had been dodging him successfully for a couple years and was talking speep about the guy he owed. Yeah, I wrote that. The Hatch murders happened near my hometown in 1973. I was way too young to know what was going on, but people always talked about it. A friend of my father's was in the police force during the Troubles in Belfast. The story goes that he tried to file a report against his fellow officers for the point-blank execution of 2 unarmed possible IRA members. He came home to find his wife and children slaughtered and was then arrested for this and sent to jail. He died not long after in jail while a private investigator was looking over his case. When my best friend was 5, his dad would bring him to the house of the woman he was cheating on his mom with and bang her in the bedroom while he sat in the room next door with paper-thin walls, really aware of what was going on just yet. In the 90s, a U.S. Army soldier stationed in Germany killed his wife's lover. He then decapitated the man and took his head to his wife, who was in the hospital pregnant with her lover's child. An old friend had moved out from his family. He had lived with aunt/uncle, I think. Bunch of people in one house. And a few months later, some gang broke in and completely slaughtered the 8 or so people living there. We're talking execution-style killing. Not a typical armed robbery. Worst of all, since his dad was MIA at the time, and mother passed away, he had to ID the bodies. I couldn't imagine having to see my grandmother with half her face blown off at the age of 15. My neighbors across the street one day took this kid in to stay with them. He was having troubles at his home. He lived about 3 streets over and was good friends with the oldest brother of family. So it was cool. As usual, we played soccer, baseball, football in our street as normal. The guy decides to go back home after about 7 days of staying there. He has the family get together and have dinner and then proceeds to shoot them all. Then kills himself. Cousin of mine was raped by her brother from the time she was 9 till she was 15. She is 31 now. Her brother is now a heroin addict. And she lets him babysit her 2-year-old daughter. Some kids my dad knew were doing some metal work in shop class or something. This is 1960s Mexico, mind you. And this kid grabs some fine metal shavings and tells another kid to come look at something he's got in his hand. Other kid comes over. Leans in. First kid opens his hand. Blows on it. Get tiny metal shavings in the other kid's eyes. Other kid, obviously in pain, rubs his eyes and makes himself blind for life. First kid got expelled. This pretty much covers it. My father is an electrician and he told me a story about a man who was electrocuted by high voltage and they found his boots melted to the ceiling. Apparently while he was being electrocuted he subconsciously ran up the wall with incredible speed all the way onto the ceiling. Then fell when some sort of breaker tripped. Kid I went to college with was at a party with his best friend. They were all drinking and the friend decided to show off his dad's guns. Accidentally blew off his own head and sprayed brains all over like 30 partygoers, including my friend. He was never quite the same after that. This is a tad humorous, but also kind of sad. This girl at my high school had her boyfriend over and they tried anal sex for the first time on this brand new couch that her family just bought. Well, I don't know the exact details of what happened next. But when he pulled out, apparently she shed all over the couch. She ended up blaming it on her dog and the father had the dog put down later that week. My own. Unfortunately, my dad molested me. However, my mother encouraged him to do it as a means to get him aroused enough to peep her afterwards. I'm late. But my new manager at work just told me this story. When she was 19, she was hiking with her then boyfriend. They had been fighting and she wanted to turn back. Words become actions and she falls off a cliff. 42 feet to the rocky bottom. This was back before cell phones, so the boyfriend had to drag her back to the car. She broke every bone in her body, besides her clavicle. Due to brain injuries, she lost 1.5 years of her life. The CEO of a local Muslim TV station near me beheaded his wife at the station and then called the police and turned himself in. Family friend's mother passed away. Really sucked that it happened. But such is life. He had to stay home for work, but his sister went out of the country for the funeral, and on her way home, the plane crashed and she was killed too. Man. Sometimes life isn't fair. My friend's uncle would jack off in his roommate's ice cream daily. In the 80s, a motorist accidentally struck a boy on a motorbike on a neighborhood street, killing him. Unfortunately, the boy was the son of crime boss John Gotti. The driver was tortured to death for this, including being skinned alive. A teacher I had in high school had a brother who murdered their sister, mother, father, and uncle in 3 separate nights. To add to the messed up part, I found this out when I was out for my 21st birthday at a bar. I saw him there. Went to say hi. Ended up having a few drinks with him. And once I mentioned my brother, he went on to talk about his for a while. Mine's not tragic as much as it's depressive. What in the city I lived in, there used to be a woman who went to university and was incredibly pretty. She had a boyfriend though, and when she broke up with him, he came into the campus and shot her at the parking lot. Had a friend in high school who told me a story about one of his coworkers. Girl coworker had been seeing a new guy for a couple months. Sexy time is over one night and he finishes on her face. A few days later, black dots appear on her face. She goes to the doctors and maggot larvae are under her skin. Turns out the guy worked at a morgue. Cliffs. Guy gives facial. Maggots under chick's face. Necrophiliac. I saw this story on here a little while ago. It was about these guys kidnapping a girl and locking her in their basement. They brutally beat and raped her. And she had to survive by eating bugs and drinking pee. I don't remember the full story though, as I tried to block it out of my mind. The long-term sub for my English teacher has had a pretty peeped up life. When she was 5, she was forced to go to an open casket funeral for her grandfather. When she was in middle school, 4 of her friends killed themselves in a chain suicide. And in high school, a week before graduation, she witnessed a classmate get in a gruesome, fatal motorcycle accident right in front of the school. And yes, she actually told us this in class because we were talking about adversity. A hedge fund billionaire from Florida pretty much got away with having little girls brought to him for sexual exploitation. Something like 10 months of probation. Should be killed. Undefined. Maybe this isn't as drastic as some, but a girl I went to school with got pregnant when she was 17. And was actually very excited about it. Lots of excited posts on Facebook. Huge baby shower. The works. And then, 8 months in, she miscarried. It was so sad she had to give birth to the dead baby. She and her boyfriend broke up. And she'd already missed out on an entire year of her life, no college. Was still living at home. Etc. And then less than a year later, her twin sister had a healthy baby and got married. It was really sad. I have a friend who got pregnant senior year in college. And was disowned by her parents. She then had a miscarriage. And found out that she had a window of about 6 months if she ever wanted a child. Her boyfriend and her discussed it and tried to get pregnant. But she was unable to. And he eventually dumped her because he wanted children someday. What a dick. I worked as a metalsmith very briefly in a Siberian town called Norilsk, depressing as peep. We were called outside by my friend who had just seen 2 kids who claimed to have ingested vodka and crocodile. I thought they were lying until we watched them roll around on the floor screaming in agony as their insides were basically melting. Our boss called an ambulance, but the paramedics refused to take them anywhere because they were outsiders and didn't belong in Norilsk. Pretty peeped up thing to watch.